let me tell you a story. I want to start that way because I'm holding a Bible. You're familiar with the book, but most of us don't read it like a story. We read it like a library of 66 books, a guidebook for life, a love letter from God, and it's all those things, but it's more. It's a story. What is a story? Well, it's simply a character in pursuit of a goal who encounters an obstacle. That's what a story is. The Bible is a story. It is a character, God, in pursuit of a goal. He's actually on an eternal mission, which is to reconcile all things to himself through the person and work of his son, Jesus Christ, so that one day there will be worshipers from everywhere gathered around the throne of King Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And this character, in pursuit of that goal, encounters an obstacle. The obstacle is called sin. We're going to get to that. I'm making a couple of assumptions in this series. First, it's that you know what this book is. Second, it's that you believe that this book is true. Third, that you believe that God is the author. So with those assumptions in place, let's look at this book not as a bunch of rules and do's and don'ts. Let's look at it as a story. As a story, we want to let the author tell us what we need to know when we need to know it. If you think about it, every time you pick up a book, you turn to page 1 and start there and let the author tell you what you need to know when you need to know it. We're going to do that with our book. So our story starts where all good stories start, in the beginning. In fact, the first 3 words of our book, in the beginning. But I guess it doesn't really start there because it goes on to say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, which tells us that God, whoever that is, since we've never read the book before, God was already there. And then he creates. It goes on to tell us that he doesn't create the normal way. You and I, when we create, we take things that exist and we make something new. God speaks things into existence. There was nothing, he speaks, and it's there. Imagine just for a moment if I turned towards this table and I was like, let there be pizza, and a pizza showed up. You would be impressed, I would be impressed. I mean, that'd be an amazing party trick. I cannot do that. God not only could do that if he wanted to, he does much more than pizza. He speaks the heavens and the earth into existence. Whoever this God is, he is different and he is special. Then he actually goes so far as to pronounce morality onto that which he has made. He says, ooh, that's good. How can he say that? Well, see, God can say that because he himself is good. This is a water glass. It's a water glass because right now it's full of water. If I filled it all the way to the top where it's doing that beveled thing and I bump it, water is going to come out because it's full of water. Very simple. If I fill it with orange juice and bump it, orange juice. If I fill it with coffee and bump it, coffee. What does that have to do with anything? Imagine for a moment that God is like this glass, but instead of water or orange juice or coffee, God is full all the way to the brim with goodness. And when he is bumped, when he acts, goodness comes out. So when he creates something, it necessarily has to be good because he is good. All of God's attributes flow out of his goodness. His love is from his goodness. His justice is from his goodness. His mercy is from his goodness. His wrath is from his goodness. God creates everything, says it's good, and then he creates man and woman, makes them in his own image, makes them for a relationship with him and says, ooh, this is really good, and gives them a job. He says, have dominion, rule this earth I have given you. Well, he puts them in the middle of a garden. He says, you can eat of anything you want in here. Oh, except for this one tree that he puts in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The day you eat of that tree, you will surely die. Whoa. As a first-time reader, this seems like a bit of an overreaction. You eat a piece of fruit and you die? What's that about? Well, let's break it down for a moment. First, we need to understand, if we jump to much later in the book, into the book of Colossians, in chapter 1 of Colossians, there is a verse that says that by God all things exist. He created them all. And in him all things consist or are held together. The idea is that right now, as we sit here, God is actively holding us and this world together. If he were to ever remove his hand, things would just fall apart. They would cease to exist. We have a word for ceasing to exist. That word is death. Imagine with me for a moment. Right now, as I'm filming this, I'm in Calgary and it's August. It's pretty nice outside. In a couple of months, I'm going to be in Calgary and it's not going to be nice outside. It's going to be freezing cold, and there's going to be some morning where it's like 20 below and like 4 inches of fresh powder. Imagine that you decide you're going to make a snowball. So you start packing fresh powder in 20 or 30 below weather. And you're packing and you're packing and you're packing. You ever tried to make a snowball in 20 below? The minute you remove one hand and stop actively making the shape of a snowball, what happens? Snow just falls apart. The ball just ceases to exist. That's the picture we're given about our life. If God were to ever remove his hand from the equation, we would just cease to exist. We would die. Back to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Who is the holder of the knowledge of good and evil? Well, that was God. So if Adam and Eve go to a tree instead of to God for the knowledge of good and evil, what are they doing? They're removing God from the equation. Of course they're going to die. They're going to cease to exist. They removed God from the equation. So why did God even put that tree there? Why not just let them eat of all the trees? Well, that would have created robots, and God created them for a relationship. Relationships need love. Love demands a choice. Let me explain. I personally am married to this lovely lady named Joanna. I'm a guy, though. I like girls. Imagine Joanna is the only girl on planet Earth. How do we know if I actually like her or if I just like girls and she's my only option? Make sense? The minute we introduce 2 or more women into the equation, we now have love. Because I choose Joanna at the exclusion of all other women on planet Earth. I now have love, because love demands a choice. So God made it as easy as possible. He says you can eat of all the trees except for one. It's not like he said you can only eat of this one. But there was still a choice because there needed to be love. Adam and Eve, they were created perfect because they were created by God, and God is good. He puts them in the garden and they have a choice. Okay, here's a sub-theme that you need to understand. Adam and Eve are what's called our federal head. What they do holds up against us in court. Easiest example I can think of, Justin Trudeau is our prime minister. If Justin Trudeau declares war on another country, we're at war, whether or not you voted for him or not. Why? Because he is our federal head. What he does holds up against us. So if Adam and Eve eat the fruit, you and I eat the fruit. If they sin, we sin. If they remove God from the equation, we remove God from the equation. Therefore, if they die, we die. And suddenly this story gets really, really personal. Well, that's exactly what happens. There's the tree. Satan, who we find out later, is God's eternal cosmic enemy. Satan and God have been battling for good and evil since before there was time. Satan comes into the story in the form of a serpent, and he says to Eve, did God really say that you can't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? She says, yeah, we can't even touch it. The day we touch it, we're going to die. Satan laughingly says, you're not going to die. God knows that the minute you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you're going to be like him, and he doesn't want that. He's holding out on you. What is this? This is Satan challenging the very goodness, questioning the very goodness of God. Oh, God's not being good to you. He's questioning the very thing that God is made up of. Well, in a terrifying twist, Eve sees that the tree is good for food, something we later call lust of the flesh, and good to look at, something we will call lust of the eyes, and able to make one wise, something we will call pride of life. Side note, 1 John tells us that every sin comes from one of those 3 temptations. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Guys, Satan has exactly 4 moves. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life, death. And he doesn't play this one until he's had lots of fun with these 3. Every time you sin, every time I sin, it's because of 2 reasons. Number 1, I've removed God from the equation. And number 2, I have given into one of those temptations or a combination of them. Every time. Satan doesn't have any new moves. He just keeps playing the same ones, just changing up the lyrics. He comes to Eve, tempts her with the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. She takes the fruit, eats it, hands it to Adam. He eats it, and instantly, you and I, your biggest problem, my biggest problem, is their biggest problem. Sin, and sin is a problem because it leads to death. We're on like page 2, page 3 of our story. It's like 1,200 pages. And everybody's gonna die? This is like the worst story ever. And then we get to what I think is the biggest verse in the entire Bible. Genesis 3, verse 15. God comes into the story, and he's talking to Eve and to the serpent, and he says, I'm gonna put strife or enmity or war between you guys, between her seed and your seed. You're gonna bruise his heel, but he's gonna crush your head. Every time you watch a movie, pretty much every time, there's an action scene at the beginning, 2-3 minutes, and then right at the end of that action scene, the credits roll. Whatever happens right before the credits roll, that's the plot we are following for the rest of the movie. You know, it's like this guy kills this guy's father and you kill my father, prepare to die, right? Like that's the plot line you're gonna follow. This is the plot line. Genesis 3:15 is the last thing before the credits roll in this idea. Whoever is the offspring of the woman is going to crush the serpent's head and solve your biggest problem, my biggest problem, which is sin and death. This book, this story, is the biggest whodunit story ever. What is a story? It's a character in pursuit of a goal who encounters an obstacle. God is pursuing us. He encounters the obstacle of sin, and this is the record of the serpent crusher, the one who's going to come and end our biggest problem. So, who is the serpent crusher? Who is the offspring of the woman that's going to solve our biggest problem? We're going to find out.